Please welcome to the stage, Beatrice Politti.
Hi, everybody. I hope that you had a moment to check your emails and get caught up on things, because we know it's a really, really busy time. If you could grab your snacks and your coffee and come back on in, that would be fantastic, and take your seats, because this is another part of the RTDNA annual conference that I personally really, really enjoy. And it's one of those few opportunities, I think, in the Canadian media landscape to actually analyze it. There isn't a lot of study of media in Canada. So along with our partner, our very wonderful partner, Ipsos, who's been with us for a number of years, and you know, Daryl and I go way back from having worked at Global together for a number of years, we're going to take a look at the 2023 Journalism by the Numbers. And we're going to look at who's actually consuming news. Are they willing to pay for it? Which is a really important question. And how much are they willing to pay for it? And what are the actual perceptions of what news is between the generations? So if you would, please welcome Daryl Bricker, Global Ipsos Public Affairs CEO.
Sounds good enough.
Excellent. Fantastic.
Thanks, Beatrice. This is always a great audience. I always enjoy this. Critical journalists looking at data. So the way I would look at what I'm going to talk to you about today is, rather than as conclusions, some interesting hypothesis generation. Because I went through these data quite a bit over the last couple of days, and it really raised more questions than it gave me answers. And maybe challenged some assumptions that I had that I don't think were particularly correct about how Canadians are engaging with news. And there's some tactical elements that we're going to look at here. So things related to, you know, whether your trust is going up or down, what people think about local news, and you know, what they think, particularly a new topic this year, what they think about AI and how it relates to what the future of news is going to be. But I thought the most interesting material was about the thing that Beatrice mentioned last, which was generations, and how they actually relate to the news. Because one thing that we do know is the news audience, even though the Canadian population reached its highest level in history this year, 40 million people, it's not like we've seen an incremental rise in consumption in news with the rise in population. So what's going on? In fact, we've seen the opposite. Because audiences should be growing for every platform as the population increases. I mean, it's one of the drivers, right? Population growth. So why isn't consumption of news, particularly in the mainstream platforms, expanding in line with the rise of the population? I'll offer a couple of clues as we go through this, but I would look at it not as necessarily as answers, but maybe clues about your own market research and what you're taking a look at in terms of understanding your audiences. So, the future of news. Trust is up 5 points over this time last year when we conducted this survey. Thunderous applause at the front. I don't know if you heard it. Guys, that's as good as my funny stuff gets, so if you don't laugh at that, it's going to be really bad. So you're going to have to pay attention and work with me here, okay? So it's up 5 points. Why is it up 5 points? I don't know. The question is whether it is up an enduring 5 points, and this is the start of a new trend moving in the other direction, or we've just seen a bounce. We won't know for a period of time. When we do the survey next year, we'll see if this is a trend that's moving in the right direction. But there has been some improvement. Next, focusing specifically on local news. 56% of Canadians feel local news has become more important to them since the pandemic. 48%, that's half of us, are more engaged with civic and local news stories than prior to the pandemic. That's what they tell us. But given what's happening to local news, one really has to wonder if that's just like the right answer to the question, you're supposed to be concerned about these things, or whether people are actually reflecting that in their consumption habits. And I think at this stage of the game, we don't see really any reflection in consumption habits on this. Next, there's concern about the future of local news. 67% of Canadians think that the gathering and delivery of local news is in jeopardy. I imagine if we asked them about national news, they'd probably be saying similar kinds of things. And 53% of Canadians are confident in the future of local news in their community, which means that half aren't. So we're at kind of a flux point right now when it comes to local news. Concern, interest among at least half the population, but really not sure about where this is going to go and what it's going to look like. But even though they say it's important, even so, though they're concerned about the future, they're really not willing to pay for it. And this should be no new news to anybody. In fact, only 31, less than $20, 80% of the population say they're prepared to pay. Now I'd like to talk briefly about AI. That's kind of the topic du jour. I'm sure it'll be the Time magazine cover this year. Maybe not, given all the events that are happening in the world, but save those, it probably would be one of the very, very top news stories. And so how is AI going to affect news? Well, 62% of Canadians believe that AI can be used in the newsroom. What does that mean? Well, among university graduates, they think probably this is already happening. Lower among people who are older. Principally, I would say not because they have plugged into how the news environment could use AI, but you'll find that most of the knowledge and most of the interest in AI is in younger populations. So a lot of older people don't necessarily know what it is, or to the extent they know anything about AI, they probably remember the movie AI, or they remember the Terminator, or something of that nature. But they only like it for certain tasks. If it can help identify disinformation, and we know that Canadians are really worried about disinformation in the news environment, yeah, if they can make it any better, 38% say sure. To verify information, 36% relates to disinformation, I would say. To research databases, nobody wants to look at databases, so if AI can help with that a little bit, sure, why not? To write full stories, absolutely not. To write paid content, people don't know what paid content is, but it sounds like a news story and therefore generates the same level of interest. They want a human touch when it comes to news and the production of news. 38% of Canadians don't think AI should be used in the newsroom at all. And skepticism exists on the future of AI for the newsroom. We cannot trust AI to be fair and unbiased, 69%, particularly among people who are older. Again, lack of familiarity with the technology. Younger people are more open to the idea. And the part of the reason is because they don't generally think that news is trustworthy anyway. As I said before, the human touch is critical to making the news, to curating the news, to deciding what is news. 85% would really rather have it created by humans, and 84% believe that newsrooms, producers of news, need to be transparent about the fact that they are using AI in the production of their news. I don't know about you, but I haven't heard a lot of disclaimers from any newsrooms lately about whether or not AI is involved in things that's being done. Frankly, I don't know what the status of that is, but as with most things that you see these days, transparency is kind of the queen when it comes to information. People want to know what's going on. And there's a certain capacity for AI to be integrated into the news. And in my own business, we're using AI a lot more these days to go through massive amounts of data and all the rest of it. So I think people have this view that there should be some advancement in terms of the use of technology in the production of anything, including the news. But they're very clear that you'd be using AI to write the news. It's all right if it frees up reporters to cover things more in depth, at least for 40% of the population. I'm confident in AI's ability to create news stories such as writing news articles or scripts for TV broadcasts, fewer than a third. Now, if it does a really good job, you might see those numbers go up. And finally, I support newsrooms using tools like voice cloning and avatar creation to present the news. Not a really popular idea at the moment, but again, probably because they don't know anything about it, they've never really seen it, but if they become familiar with it and it works, they've at least got a starting point at 29%. That's a third of the population say it's okay. Who doesn't? I think I said that like 5 times. I agree with you. Here's what I want to spend my time on, because normally this presentation would stop here. So, older and younger Canadians differ on what the news is, but it'd stop on this slide. What do 18 to 34-year-olds want from the news? I know, because marketing, which I work in, most presentations stop at this slide. So what do the young folks want? Well, here's the problem. They trust social media more than they trust anything else. For them, the news is as much entertainment as it is information. And maybe when I was 18 years old, I thought the same thing too. They get their news from social media. They like online-only publications. They're down with Instagram and they're down with TikTok. They could be spending more on news subscriptions over the next few years, because why not? They're not spending anything on it right now, by the way, but maybe when they run into some money, which, by the way, they have none of, maybe they will spend it on news subscriptions, but that's speculative. They think the news could do better at reflecting the issues and diversity of marginalized groups in Canada. Absolutely. But their list of marginalized groups is quite expansive. They believe AI can be used to write news stories and create other content because, again, as I said before, it's as much entertainment as it is information. And they think newsrooms don't need to be clear about how and when AI is used. And finally, they think AI is the future of news creation. Boy, that doesn't sound like a great target group, does it? But we spend all our time and attention on that in most marketing meetings that I ever go to. What do the kids want? Let me explain a couple of quick things. 2 weeks ago, we announced the lowest birth rate in Canadian history. The fastest growing group of the population in Canada today is people over the age of 65. And guess what? They have all the money, they have all the resources, they have all the houses, they have all the defined pensions, they have everything. These guys are in the marketplace where they can barely afford to get by. How much money do they have for news? The answer is they'll take the free stuff on TikTok and Instagram and other things. But we spend so much time and attention trying to capture this group. And it's based on this old marketing notion that youth drives everything in the economy. And the truth is it doesn't anymore. But we still think that it does. And then we never get to this slide, which is 55-year-olds. And what's interesting about the news is these guys used to be your core audience. These were people who used to read newspapers. These were people who used to be engaged with TV and radio. They still are to a large extent, much more than the younger population. And the joke I usually hear when I come to things like this is, well, it's because this audience is dying off. No, Canadians are living longer every year. I mean, there was a slight hiccup due to COVID, but we're getting very good at keeping people alive in this country. We're getting really bad at making new people. So why don't we give these guys a little bit of love? Because they've at least tried news. They don't have all the skepticism that the younger population, who doesn't really see the value of it and sees it as much as entertainment as anything, yeah, we're going to have to figure out a way to break through with that. But I know anybody who's worked in marketing before, it's easier to get a departed customer back because they at least know what you have than it is to try and create a new customer, create interest among a new customer who's never tried you. So what about these folks? Well, they trust the traditional media sources. They like TV. They like newspaper. Yeah, sure, maybe they read it online, but they're still into it. They still listen to news radio. That's where they get their information. They may not want to pay for news services like aggregators and curated content and podcasts and online media sources. By the way, the other guys don't either. But maybe that's because somebody hasn't come up with what works for them yet. And by the way, they don't want to be treated as seniors. They want to be treated as mainstream consumers. They don't want to be reminded that they're old in every story. They think the news media does a good job of reflecting Canada's many diverse facets, but that's because good enough for them. But at the same time, they're walking away from those places that are really focusing their targeting on the youth. They fear for the future of local and regional news. They care more about it too. So there's your a target group that's interested in talking to. And they think that AI should not be used in the newsroom at all. So if I was getting into AI heavily being used in the news, I'd be worried about even more of these guys walking away. So you're going to have to explain it very carefully. And finally, they prefer a human to create and curate the news for them rather than AI. And for every journalist, you should be saying thank you, because you're my audience. Now, granted, we're going to get younger people to move into this audience because younger people in this country aren't as young as we think they are. They're actually older. As I said before, we stopped having babies. So as people move into their older stage of their lives, are they going to take on the habits of these people, or are they going to maintain the habits of the younger generations? That'll be the really interesting marketing question. So if I'm working on news and trying to figure out who my audience is, I'm going to be looking at the range of these things rather than saying, what do the kids want? Yeah, we need to find out what the kids want. But if you're focused on that, you're missing the part of the audience that has all the money. And by the way, likes what you do. But maybe what you're doing right now isn't as appealing to them as it used to be. And this is not a call for nostalgia. It's a call for being open-minded about the truth of the Canadian population and how they deal with news. So to conclude, some final thoughts. Is it possible to reestablish trust? We will see. Meet me back here in a year and we'll see if it fell back down or if it's gone back up. Tap into the concern about future local news to create impetus to fund it. Yeah, people want to have some local news, but how do we create that product that they'll actually put their hard-earned dollars down for? And maybe it's people who own houses, who actually have a bigger stake in the community, who actually vote, older people, who are participating more in their communities. Maybe they're the target. I don't know. But maybe you should go out and do some research and find out. Use AI transparently within limits, but there's a thin edge of a wedge for building acceptance, particularly as people become more familiar with it. But I would say it's not for saying that this story was generated by AI. It's to simply make reporters their lives a bit easier, being able to generate some of that background information and that kind of thing. Processing of large amounts of data, those kinds of things, would probably be the best place to start. And finally, tailor the delivery of news to the viewer. Consider what works for different generations, and I would say the key part of that is understanding that there's a wider range of Canadian audience than the one I think a lot of media, and by the way, most marketers, spend all their time focused on. A wider range of opportunities, I think, in the marketplace. Anyway, that's my ugly face, and that's Ipsos. Thank you very much, and I'd like to invite Beatrice back onto the stage.
Thank you very much, Daryl, for those numbers and that presentation. And we'd like to ask you a whole bunch of questions now.
Yep.
I would like the audience to feel free to put your hand up if you have a question. We have folks that'll run around with a microphone so that you can pose it. Are there any questions right now? Yes, please. One moment.
You're all journalists. You have questions.
Lots of questions. Go ahead.
My question is, you mentioned when talking about the younger audiences, they were willing to spend, I think, a max of $20. Was that monthly, annually?
It was. I think it was annually. Yeah, it's not a big number. Well, I mean, guys, you all run news organizations. How great are those paywalls working in terms of generating tons and tons and tons and tons and tons of revenue to replace the traditional subscription revenue? That's not. I mean, it helps, but people are not yet broken into this idea that you pay for news in Canada. There are some key audiences that are doing this. There are some organizations that are having more success than others, but has it been a boon to, say, for example, the major national newspapers? Not so far.
Mm-hmm. Go ahead.
Yeah, so with paywalls being as unpopular as you're saying, and with people often defaulting to using ad blockers on browsers on PC, what kinds of solutions are there for funding for papers?
Well, you'd have to ask somebody who is an expert on funding for papers. I don't know. What do you think? Yeah, but this is the dilemma.
Right.
This is the dilemma. I mean, everybody's been struggling with it, and there's some people have been more successful, like the New York Times and the Economist, and Some people have been able to find their sugar daddies like the Washington Post or whatever, but nobody has unlocked this one generically in a way that everybody can take advantage of. So yeah, it is the dilemma facing the news. I agree.
And even if people were willing to spend up to $20 a month, that's still actually not a lot when it comes to paying for news. But I think that we recognize in our country, we have this expectation that news is going to be free. And so it takes a lot to entice somebody to pay for something that they used to get gratis. I think I saw two arms up here. On this side? Okay,
Yeah.
let's go to this side. Go ahead.
Okay, sorry. I was just curious to know how about you going to collect this data for the 18 to 34-year-olds. Was it via social media? Was it in person? Was it just an email survey?
No, we have online panels that we do surveys with. It's the way that research gets done in this country. If you're doing readership research or whatever, or viewer research, you're doing it exactly the same way that we just did this. Yeah, so it's the way we would do any type of poll.
I think I saw, a couple of folks in the middle.
Representative of the national population, weighted correctly, so it has all the right proportions of the population according to all the main demographic indicators. So it's within the expected margin. It's what you would probably get if you went out and did the same survey again today. This was done in the first 2 weeks of September, by the way.
Mm-hmm. So the 18 to 34 and 25 to 54 have been not where the money is for quite a while now, and yet it hasn't changed as far as how much advertisers will pay for spots, depending on the numbers of people watching in those demographics. When is that going to change? I mean, the 55 plus do have the money. They're the ones who are going to buy the products. And yet this is very old thinking.
Yeah, and this is I feel like Don Quixote on this one, because I go out and talk to all of these people, and it's the same thing. You walk in and there's the 35-year-old media director and creative director and all the rest of it. And it's like, I want to make ads for me. I want to make the way I understand the marketplace is what I want to do. And then you say to them, what I just said to you, and it's like I dropped an anvil on their head. It's just never thought about it. So, because since the end of the Second World War, I mean, economic growth has been driven by population growth, and population growth has been driven by youth. And it was an extremely smart strategy in 1975. I mean, when Coke decided to do the ads about, I'd like to teach the world to sing and all the rest of it, that was simpatico with the youth movement. It was with the strength of youth. It was absolutely spot on. It was the first time in human history in which youth had its own independent income. It could buy records. Nobody had youth music before. There was only music. Nobody had youth clothes before. There was only clothes. Nobody had youth products or anything. They didn't exist. Maybe, some toys for kids, but we never thought of youth as a market. They were only part of their parental income. They got their own independent income as we went through the end of the Second World War to today. And so it made sense. But today, it's just not the same. It's not the case. And the reason is because they aren't. The population pyramid doesn't look like this anymore. It's flipping. And guess what? The people at the top, like this, have all the money. Why? Because they got the houses, they got the pensions, they got the whatever. They have it all. And the problem that we have with them is they're not seen as consumers. They're seen as hoarders, basically. They bought their first car, they bought their first house, they have all their white goods, they raise their families. They're looking for things that are for them, but nobody's making anything for them because they're invisible.
Yes, go ahead.
So isn't it time to make them visible again?
Yes. No, that's what I'm arguing, yeah.
Who is going to have the cojones, as use an old term? Sorry if anyone misinterprets that as male-oriented.
I'll interpret that as data.
Data, there you
Here's
are.
the data, and because that's all I have.
Like somebody's got to take the lead. So somebody's got to make an investment, right, in content creation. Oh, woe unto us that local media is dying. Oh, well, the reason it's dying is because they're trying to get people who do not consume it to consume it, and they will not. So therefore, it's time for people to break the mold again, is it not?
Well, it's just like anything. I mean, I'm in the business of coalition building, whether it's in politics or in business or whatever. And if your coalition isn't getting bigger, you're not doing it right. I mean, the dependent variable in the equation is viewership, readers, revenue. And if they're not going up, something's got to change.
I think we've got a question over there. Yes.
You mentioned that you mentioned the lower birth rate, right? And I think that we all know that Canada combats that lower birth rate with immigration. And so I think that a large part of the 18 to 34-year-olds, there's a large portion of immigrants there, right? A lot of them are newly arrived. A lot of them have different media consumption habits based on where it is that they come from or their home countries and so on and so forth. So my question is, how much is immigration being considered in the survey? Because I think that it does play a large role in the results, and it would be a better way to sort of analyze and read through them.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And I would say, though, that age is still the determining factor. The thing about immigration, it's like a sugar high. All we're doing is kicking the problem down the road. Because immigrants don't come in at the age of 0. And after a generation, they have exactly the same birth habits as Canadians. So it's like a sugar high. It's going to last for a couple of decades, and that's it. I would say, and this is one thing that I'm really encouraging our clients to do, is to talk more to new Canadians, because they are the fastest growing part of the Canadian population. I mean, you know, one of the things I always hear is the Indigenous community is the fastest growing. No, it is not. The Indigenous community is about that big. It's about 1.8% of the population at the max. We bring in more than 1 million immigrants a year. The entire status Indian population in Canada is 700,000 people. So yes, we have to have diversity in all the ways that you can look at it, but we also have to look at who Canada is becoming. And by the way, those people aren't moving downtown. They're moving to car commuting suburbs. 90% of Canada's population growth over the last 20 years has been in car commuting suburbs. So whatever that downtown perspective is, that's not them. And so what do we talk about when we talk about the suburbs? And in fact, you know, the death of local news is really a problem, because more and more we're going to be reflecting that downtown perspective. And that's not where the population is growing. In fact, the city of Toronto is losing population. So yes, I agree 100. If I can agree, you know, numbers matter to me, so I can only agree to 100% with you. But I'll say there's margin error, and I agree 105% with you. So yes, absolutely.
Go ahead, Jen.
Thanks. I know we're out of time. Thanks, Daryl, for this. You've done this survey and presentation for several years now. What would you say surprised you most about this year's results?
The starkness and the difference between the generational aspects. We've seen it coming. Beatrice and I have talked about this for a long time, but it's becoming more stark than I've ever seen. And the part that I find most dismaying is the fact that there is this desire for people in that older generation to be able to consume information, and a willingness to trust the people who are producing it that is just doesn't seem to be getting noticed by the people who are responsible for the business decisions about news in this country. And by the way, it's not unique to this place. It's unique to marketing everywhere. It's unique to media everywhere. But there's an opportunity there, and you know, I don't want to be cliche, but a great cliche is the Wayne Gretzky thing. Go where the puck's going. And the Canadian population's 42 on average. It's not 21.
We have another yes, go ahead.
Hi, my name is Georgia Callahan.
Hey, Georgia.
I am a Durham College student. As you can see, there are multiple Durham College students here, and we are in journalism.
Go to Durham.
And we have loved listening to you, but my question for us would be, how would you suggest, as the younger generation, we are ones who peddle in news, we are interested in news, we do read the news, we do spread the news, we do work on it. How do you suggest to us that we combat our generation's distrust and plain indifference in the news from a generational perspective of our own?
Well, I'd throw that right back at you. You're the expert, not me. And the second thing I would say is take away from this that it's not about the news necessarily you want to see, that the audience is bigger. And that's one of the things I worry about when I go in newsrooms and see, you know, tons and tons and tons of young people. It's like, it's not about the news you want to see. It's about the news the audience wants to see. And you're not necessarily reflective of the audience as much as you think you are. You're not.
An audience is extremely important when targeting any message.
Yeah.
And news is a message. So it's, I think, probably important to take into account that wider notion of audience. Just scanning here to see if there are any more hands up. Oh, yes, more hands.
Have I offended anybody else?
Perhaps
it's what I do. So.
Well, maybe I'll continue the offence. Perhaps maybe we should be looking. I've heard, I think, 3 comments so far that local news is dying, and no, it's not. No one needs to feel sorry for me in the room, but I'm probably the only one here from Saskatchewan. And I can tell you that our newsrooms are growing. We have opportunities. We have 5 more positions we've created this year alone between newsrooms. Local news is not dying, and perhaps we would have better success if we start the conversation from the success rather than the doom and gloom.
Yeah, no, I think it'd be interesting to look at the concept of local and then plot it against the where the communities are growing. So the fastest growing communities in Canada are car commuting suburbs, as I said before. So local news there, big deal. Also, Saskatchewan has the benefit of, along with Alberta, getting massive immigration over the space of the last couple of decades. I mean, one of the biggest changes that we've seen in Canadian population is the growth of Western Canada. It's not like the West wants in anymore. The country is becoming West. I mean, if you take a look at Quebec and Atlantic Canada, they're all suffering. I mean, they've had a bit of an improvement in terms of population with some immigration, but the massive growth in the Canadian population is taking place in the Toronto suburbs and in Western Canada, mostly again in suburban communities. But if you go out into the wild north of Saskatchewan, it's old, there's no money, and there's few people. I mean, the average age of a farmer in Canada, I think, is about 57 now. And they're trying to get out of the business as well. So I think local news, to the extent that it's understood as commuting distance to the city or access to the city, and that commuting distance is actually moving out now with hybrid work, there's the opportunity, because those are the places that are growing. Downtown isn't. Downtown isn't. People don't really live downtown. Right? This is why the irony of everything that they're doing in the city of Toronto to make it, the 15-minute city. If we have the 15-minute city in Toronto, the city will go broke. I mean, it needs car commuting suburbanites. And now that they have an option and they're not coming back downtown, we've got a big, big problem. And by the way, people who live in the city don't like them, but you're dependent on them.
We had a question over here, I think. Yes.
Hi there. I'm just wondering if you have any data in terms of young people seeing news as entertainment, in terms of how that compares historically and how people's ideas about news tend to change as they age.
I kind of alluded that in my comments when I said maybe I thought that way when I was 18. I don't know that anybody was really looking at it. We used to have a very, very serious, I mean, always, a more serious view of what the news is. And we act like that's like, the way news has always been. I mean, no, newspapers back in the early 1900s, and I mean, you had like 10 different newspapers and they were all fake news. It was just the way things were done. I mean, you had the Liberal Party paper, you had the Progressive Conservative Party paper, you had the Socialist paper. I mean, people used to be, it used to be part of the entertainment mix historically too. It's just that right now, for young people, it's basically about entertainment. Much more than it is for older people who kind of grew up in more of that Lloyd Robertson, Peter Mansbridge type era, where you had the kind of the voice of truth speaking to you from the from the CBC or from CTV or from from Global News or whatever, or from the radio station CFRB here in Toronto or whatever. That voice of truth, our version of Walter Cronkite, and that doesn't exist the way that it used to anymore. So, interesting to do some research on what young people more deep research on what young people are doing. But then if I was your person in charge of market research, I'd demand an equal budget to go out and find out why seniors left. Because they've already tried your product. What chased them away?
I think we have time for maybe one more question. Is there anybody? Yes, I see a couple of arms up here. Let's go with these two. Let's start here and then go to this area. I think there's 3. We can probably fit them in. Go ahead.
Hi. What would you say is a journalist's best asset when covering the news?
Where I can't see you, sorry, but I would say your ability to consume a lot of information, reduce a lot of information into something that somebody cares about and wants to read about and wants to learn from. That's the genius of a journalist, somebody who's able in the eye of a storm to consume all of the information and come up with something that is inspiring for people to read. Fact-based, telling them the truth about what's going on. I think that's, maybe I'm nostalgic, but that's what I'm looking for. Tell me something I don't already know. It's generally why I don't like reading a lot of columnists in Canada. Sorry if there's any columnists from Canada in here. It's like if you're writing the same column every day, I don't read it. I don't have time. I already know what you're going to say. Surprise me.
Fantastic. Let's go to, there were a couple of more. Yes, go ahead. Yes.
Thank you. My name's Jackie. I wanted to talk a bit about AI. I don't know if you caught the session before this, the bear pit with leaders from...
Don't like bears. Okay, so...
leaders from some of the country's, or the country's largest news organizations talking about whether or not they use AI in their newsrooms. As an example, CTV's leader said they outright aren't using it. Seeing what we saw in your presentation about the difference between the 18 to 34s and then the 55 plus don't want it. The younger generation is okay with it, is seemingly more comfortable with it. Does that concern you? What were your thoughts on those results?
You know, we use it in our own business a fair amount. And like I said, for large tasks that are better meant for machines and consuming lots of information, makes sense. And by the way, every time you go on Google, you're using AI. So, you can't really say you're not using it because we all do every day. Increasingly, we're going to find all those social media platforms, that's how they're going to deal with us, with an increasing injection of artificial intelligence and machine learning into everything that they do. I mean, we certainly do it. I mean, if you're someone who's a reporter and you've got, an access to information, and everybody knows what taking out the garbage means, from an access to information request, and you've got the ability to scan in all of this stuff that's meaningless to find the one thing that's really important, maybe you could get AI to help you out a little bit with that. That only makes sense. I would. I mean, for reducing large amounts of information down to things that you can manage, data reduction, it's a reasonable thing. The problem gets into if the AI is biased and is reducing the data in a certain direction. And that's maybe where we need competing AI machines and understanding, the biases in them and that kind of thing. But I'm absolutely fascinated with AI. I think it's an incredibly interesting thing, but I think its promise in many ways is greater than what it will probably be able to deliver. And I think its appeal, other than in these things that we're talking about, is going to be less than people think. Kind of like electric cars. Everybody thinks it's a great idea, but hardly anybody buys them.
Are you worried that newsrooms aren't embracing them as quickly as they should be? I mean...
No, I think that supply is going to create demand, and some clever person in the newsroom is going to figure out how to use it in a responsible way to help them break something that's important, or help them do their job more efficiently, or arguably, in some instances, heretically, I'm going to say this, maybe even better. And then other people are going to adopt it until they find out what the flaw is, and then they're going to fix it. And that's the way that everything seems to work going forward. Same thing when nobody was going to use social media. Well, look at us now. Nobody was going to, we're going to do it the old gumshoe way. We're going to go out and collect all our information that way. Well, who does that anymore, really, to the same extent? Well, there's a bit of that, but there's also the use of other tools to help you be more efficient in terms of the way that you go through information. So I think AI is going to find its place. Do I think that there's going to be an AI bot newsreader? Yeah, somebody will play with it for the novelty, but I don't think that it'll have a lot of appeal unless not initially.
With that, I'll say, here's to the human touch in news. I'm shocked that, 32% of people think it's okay that AI create entire news stories, articles, and scripts for television, and that 29% think it's okay for voice cloning and having an avatar. I was a bit shocked by that. You phrased it as just a third. I'm thinking a third? That's incredible, considering that that's really
It's enough to win a federal election in Canada.
It's also how I made my living, and that's where my talent was, in television. Anyway, good to know I can be replaced by AI. Thank you very much. We've run out of time. I hope that you found the session informative. Thank you very much, Cheryl.
Thanks.